Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again, and as promised, I am back to do another pitch for my slasherverse movie series. I really just think of it as, what if someone could come in and make like a whole universe where they're all in the same place and they all end up meeting up at some point. And I really think that would be a nice thing to do. I think that this would be the best way to do it. And it's not like this could be the last thing for everyone, but I really think that this is what should happen. I mean, just writing this will be Sleepaway Camp 5, and I won't give away the subtitle because that's a spoiler for the film. It was so much fun to write, and the reason why I decided to do this now is because I had come up with these ideas in 2017, but I really didn't feel comfortable with sharing them until Halloween Ends came out. Halloween Ends was like a disaster. It was just a egotistical, shitty-ass Christine ripoff Stephen King Halloween. It was horrible. And it made me think, if they can do Halloween Ends, then I could make these. That's just to put it nicely, okay? So, first off, this does follow after The Stepfather 4, and that is important because, Stepfather 3, and that is important because it is all going to be connected. It's not going to be, just like, oh, that happens. No, it is all connected like a TV show. So, and I was really inspired for this movie. I told you guys that for The Stepfather, I was inspired by Psycho 2, the book. For this movie, I was really inspired by the Lone Gunman TV show. So, if you've ever seen that, it's a fantastic show, and it's funny. It's got serious stuff in it. It's a very, very quality show, and it only went on for one season, and I really felt like this could be almost like an episode of The Lone Gunman without the Lone Gunman in it. So, follows Okay, so first off, remember at the end of Sleepaway Camp 3, where Angela is in the ambulance and she kills the two paramedics? Well, we got that here, but instead, she's already killed both paramedics, and she's just lying there singing the Happy Camper song. The environment dissolves into a death row prison cell in 2022, where she's on her bed and singing loudly, much to some of the other prisoners' irritation. She's interrupted when the guards bring in a new prisoner to be her cellmate. Her cellmate has a poster of an angel, not her cellmate, has a poster of an angel with Angela's face posted on it. There's also a picture of Aunt Martha and other strange things like dolls of previous victims. The new cellmate is extremely unfriendly and takes it upon herself to rip down the angel poster. When Angela complains, the cellmate doesn't care. They get to talking, and Angela asks her what she's in there for. The cellmate seems to be even more confident and self-righteous than Angela, telling her how she and her husband molested their kids and made videos of it to sell. She has no shame. She made good money off of it. She goes into full descriptions to try to unnerve Angela. It works and makes Angela shut up. At night, the cellmate is standing over Angela and taking a shit on her chest, Amber Heard style. Angela freaks out and flails around, but then she hears a guard coming. So she's forced to sit back and not do anything. That's when the cellmate smears it all over her outfit. Angela has no choice but to sit there. The cellmate says, "You snooze, you lose, angel of shit." At lunch the next day, it's a different atmosphere. Angela is sitting and having a great lunch with the cult following of girls she's developed. They surround her, and some of them even give her their food. Then the cellmate tries to join their table. Angela has her friend stand down and lets the cellmate join. She then lets that sick woman go on and expose her personality to her friends, too. Angela sits in her cell and is given a huge pile of letters. Fan mail. One letter tells her her Aunt Martha died. Another, some little kid who wants her autograph. The cellmate gets jealous she only got one letter for herself, so she takes all of Angela's and flushes them down the toilet. That was the last straw. That night, Angela stands over the cellmate with cold, dead eyes. She sings the Happy Camper song. One cell by one, everyone else continues singing. The cellmate doesn't wake up. And then we hear a struggle. Two cellmates are fighting, and we hear guards rushing to them. A distraction. Angela smiles and ties up her entire body and gags her. She says, "You snooze, you lose," and picks up her cellmate. She dangles her over the toilet and bashes her head into it until it smashes and fits down the toilet hole. The cellmate squirms and screams. "You should be grateful. At least there aren't any leeches in there." Then she continues pushing her and pushing her, forcing her entire body down the toilet and flushing every once in a while. The blood gushes out of the toilet all over the cell's floor. Finally, she's entirely flushed down. Angela then sits on the toilet and smiles. We see Angela in a courtroom being tried for the murder of her cellmate. The prosecution says, "Your Honor, Angela Baker has killed every single cellmate she has ever had. I believe she should spend the rest of her remaining years on death row in solitary confinement." And keep in mind, I don't really know about, the differences of these types of, cells, in terms of maybe you don't have a cellmate if you're on death row. I can't remember. That could easily be changed. And I just said that because I know some people will be like, "Well, that's not accurate to prison." And so, solitary. The judge pounds his gavel and says, "Hell yeah! Lock her up and throw away the key. Case dismissed." Angela passes her cellmates in the hall and says, not cellmates, but, friends, and says, "Meet me at the waterfront after the social." The prisoners start whispering that phrase to every other cell. Angela is in the shower the next day. Angela's cult starts a riot at lunch and gains entry to solitary using scared guards. A guard is watching Angela shower. Angela is taking it for a while. Angela's cult, and that sounded weird too, she's taking it for a while. She's stalling. Angela's cult makes it into the shower and whips the guard to death with towels with soap in them. They throw Angela the guard's outfit and tell her they have to go back into the madness to escape. Angela leads her cult into the riot, stabbing through prisoners with the shiv she's given. The cult followers say, "Angela, this way, no, this way." Then the unthinkable happens, and she's stabbed herself. She bleeds out onto the floor and she falls. She starts making a snow angel in the blood. The cult followers yell for her to come. Then one of them possibly comes to rescue her. We don't find out. And so I just like to say that was my idea for Better Call Saul for the ending of that series. I thought it would have been cool for something like that to happen, where you don't really know if he escapes or not, and all of his followers help him escape. So I just thought it would work with this actually a lot better. And then we get the titles, And then Stephanie is sitting in the back of Andy's new van, an old silver Shamrock Company van. They both have slightly different appearances and clothing. She says, "So you're sure she escaped?" Andy says, "They let me. They will let her too. And she doesn't need to wait till the summer to get back in business." She says, "What kind of camp happens in the winter, though?" He doesn't reply. She says, "Stop the van." He stops and looks at her. She says, "Now, keep in mind the Lone Gunman TV show, the way that I'm doing this, the tone, it is very, very anti the last movie pitch that I did, and so this is going to come off as rather goofy. When you told me the off-screen exposition about how they staged your death, which got out of control to where you blacked out and killed one guard and escaped, I believed you. And when I woke up next to you in my apartment and you gave me your entire backstory about how you were beaten senseless as a child, sent to some brainwashing facility, turned into a killer, and never actually consciously committed any of the killings while we had some hot cocoa, I believed you. And when you convinced me you needed to hunt down infamous serial killers like my dead stepfather in order to find out who's really behind all this hanky-panky, because you conveniently forgot about it as well as whatever triggers you to black out and kill, I believed you. But can you please tell me what kind of sleepaway camps go on when it's 13 days to Christmas? Spring Stink Muscle Builders Company conference room. The CEO is a man named Coach Meatloaf. And now this is the new character that I would play. He'd just be a caricature, like all the characters in this film, really. He does a presentation on the work retreat his fitness company will be going on. He shares a cringeworthy video of the camp, a summer camp called Camp... And this whole script is going to destroy me. I'm just going to be like laughing and laughing, and people are going to be like, this is lame. You're laughing at your own shit. A camp called Camp Cocksucker, which is spelled CAWKSUKKA. It is an 80s themed camp. They will be staying there for a full week. Those who choose to not go will have to come remotely. Killer's POV. We see the inside of the killer's cabin. There's a uniform for Camp Rolling Hills as well as another copy of Camp New Horizons. There are religious pictures on the walls and pictures of Aunt Martha and many pictures of victims dead in funny ways. There are also lots of 80s things as if this cabin is caught in a time warp. After all, Angela wouldn't have been back to this cabin since the 80s. We see a whiteboard with a plan. Find a camp, get killing supplies, infiltrate the camp, kill everyone in sight. We then see an 80s computer hooked up somehow and running, but it's impossible to do anything on it useful. It is unusable. Killer's POV continued. A man walks queerly in the woods. He carries around his phone taking pictures of everything. He takes pictures of plants, trash on the ground, trees. He's enjoying himself too much. The killer holds up the 80s computer ready to attack. Then she decides to do something else and puts the computer down. She places a large rock on the trail. He doesn't see it because he's so stupid and so busy looking at his phone. He gets a text from someone. He takes a picture of the dirt on the ground and sends it. Then he trips on the rock and lets go of his phone. The killer then runs up to him with the 80s computer and says, "Too much screen time, not enough scream time," he screams. The computer smashes his face in. She picks up his phone and gets another text. It's Jan. Someone named Jan. A reoccurring joke in the film that doesn't really have much that adds to the plot, but it's funny. She takes a picture of the dead man and sends it to Jan. Jan says, "Nice AI art, bro." Then she sends back a picture of herself getting gang raped by aliens. An AI art picture. The killer goes, "Ew, gross." Then she texts Jan and says, "How do you find a camp?" She texts back, "You're thinking of throwing us a work retreat? Oh my god, you're the best. I never should have called you Farty McFarterson." Just go to Instagram and type in the search bar, #work retreat, and then PS I love you. Don't tell your wife. The killer goes, "Ugh," and then just searches on Instagram, immediately finding a picture of the Spring Stink Muscle Builders taking a picture together and saying that they're excited to go to Camp Cocksucker that week. Stephanie and Andy are stopped at a diner to eat. Stephanie asks what they do once they got there. Andy says, "We'll line everyone up and see which one of them is wearing a mask." Stephanie says, "Like a Scooby-Doo episode?" "No." Andy says, "All 3 killing sprees Angela went on were performed undercover." Stephanie says, "And what happens once we find said killer?" Andy says, "We find out a weakness she has and use it to our advantage." Stephanie says, "We don't have time to go track someone down from her past." Andy says they don't need to. He found a strange pattern in all 3 cases. There was always a person who Angela felt was nicer than the rest. That person was kept around until the very end when they inevitably found out she was a he killer. Stephanie says, "So your plan is to be nice to her?" Andy says, "It's a bold strategy. It's worked out many years for us humans. Like when I first met you, for instance." Stephanie says, "I hope this doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, but I was wondering, what did it feel like when you blacked out? Do you remember anything beforehand leading up to it?" He says, "It's fine. Honestly, the word brainwash is a perfect word to describe it. I went about life normally, and then all of a sudden something switched. It felt like my brain would wash around in acid, and the only way to get it to stop was to do the act, the killing. But I never wanted to go through with it. That's when I black out." Killer's POV. We see the killer holding her 80s Sharpie trying to cross out "find a camp." It doesn't work though. Fitting, since the next step is get killing supplies. Killer's POV. The killer walks into a general store in the middle of nowhere. There's a redneck and someone else shopping, and the clerk is a mean old man barking orders at his teenage son. The killer immediately goes and gets a Sharpie. Then she gets items to kill people with, like blades, blunt instruments, etc. I'm not naming specifically because I haven't determined the kills yet. As she shops, she gets really, really frustrated with the shop owner yelling at his son. It's a typical, to me, one of the things that I thought about with this movie was, you know what? I see this all the time in public where I see shitty parents acting shitty to their children. And honestly, like, it's moments like that where it makes me wish that I could be a serial killer, because, like, I just can't stand that when I see these horrible parents that are horrible to their kids. So as she shops, she gets, okay, the other 2 customers leave. The yelling gets louder since they don't know she's still in there. That's when the owner hits his son and smacks him across the face while continuously being toxic. The killer has had enough. She sets her things down in the cart and picks up a fishing rod. From behind the aisle, she casts her line at the counter. She misses, but they don't notice. Then she casts blindly and hooks the abuser in the eyeball. The shop owner falls over on the glass counter, breaking it to pieces. This causes all of the hunting knives in different sizes to become available. The boy panics and freezes when the killer comes out with the fishing rod. She reels in his eyeball and holds it up. "That's the thing about sick abusers like you. You think no one's watching, but somebody is always keeping an eye on you." The killer picks up the longest knife and stabs him in the other eye. Then she stomps on the knife until it penetrates the other side of his skull. The teenage boy stands there helpless and crying. The killer points the knife at him and then points the knife at the security camera. Montage. Arthur, the fat guy, packs a suitcase full of sweets. He has a shirt saying, "Always bulking." Betty, the thirst trap, has her cuckold husband taking pictures of her posing sexy poses next to her breakfast. Carl, the steroid freak meathead, orders his prescription of steroids at Walmart while standing in line with other Walmart shoppers. Jerry Lynn, the sellout, gets in her car while looking at her house where she doesn't have anyone to say goodbye to her. She turns on the radio where she listens to her own commercial about freezing your body to lose weight. Pee-wee, the vegan, unearths some plants from his yard and then puts them with dirt on his kids' plates. His kids eat the plants while he literally goes in the bathroom and drinks his own pee for breakfast, gargling with it too. It's vegan after all. Yolanda, the diversity department head, kisses goodbye her 3 white husbands. Her stale home has no culture to it whatsoever, which makes you wonder if Yolanda is a big fat hypocrite. Zeke, the power lifter, is about to enter his car with his tiny suitcase when he sees a little kid is trapped underneath the tire of a car next door. He runs to the kid and lifts the car until he gets out. Finally, Coach Meatloaf enters his oven mobile with 2 babes sporting "Got Spring Stink" shirts on. He pours a protein shake into champagne glasses and toasts with them to going to Camp Cocksucker. And I will tell you guys the cast later and why they chose them. I might have to split this up into 2 parts because I really tried to go in depth with this, which made this double the size of The Stepfather 3. Stephanie and Andy search for a camp in December. Then an ad for Spring Stank Muscle Builders pops up. They ignore it. They decide maybe it would be good to look up the old camp where the murders happened. Then they can find crime scene pictures and videos of people touring it. Oh wait, no, they do find those things. And they even find December camps and the year-long ghost tours they give on-site. Bingo. So basically they're thinking, that could be kind of considered like a camp where you have a group of people. They go out into the woods to look for ghosts, get EVPs and stuff. That could be like a camp in December. Killer's POV. She nails a picture of the dead shop owner and his son giving him a finger on the wall. Then she rummages through her supplies and takes out a blank t-shirt and fabric marker pack. She turns on a cassette player with Angela preaching about killing and who deserves to die. She opens up her first color marker and gets to work. Then all of a sudden she gets a text from Jan. "What you doing?" The killer texts, "Making a custom t-shirt, you?" Jan says, "Fuck yeah, bitch boy! Drawing contest it is." The contest ensues. We see a ridiculous sequence of the killer drawing her t-shirt. Then she gets a picture of Jan's boobs, the shirt underneath them saying, "Do you heart pepperoni tits?" The killer takes a picture of her shirt saying, "Spring Stink Muscle Builders," and sends it to Jan. Jan says, "Ha ha, you win, stud muffin." caption Tuesday the 13th. And that will be the day that it's the 13th in December this year, so that's why I put that. We see vantage points of Camp Cocksucker. The lake is almost frozen solid and next to the parking lot. The main lodge is a brick lodge with a giant Native American chief smiling face on top of it. He's holding a spear or an arrow with an innocent camper skewered on it. The main lodge has a nice big patio as well. There's 2 sets of 3 cabins, one set for men and one for women. There's also a trail going through the middle of the camp and leading into the vast Georgia forest. Then there's an infirmary and a counselor's cabin too. Surrounding both of them are 2 sets of outhouses. Stephanie and Andy stop at the general store and get supplies. Andy buys a water pistol and says, "It couldn't hurt. Jason's weakness is water." Stephanie picks up a pair of handcuffs and bug spray. The teenage boy clerk gladly rings them up, but he can't talk, just smile. His tongue has been cut out. Killer's POV. The killer puts all the supplies into a comically large backpack along with a Freddy and Jason mask. The killer heads out of the cabin and onto the main road. Then she walks right across the street to Camp Cocksucker. For some reason, these idiots don't stop building camps around ones where people were killed. She approaches the front sign, saying, "This camp is dedicated to Chief Cocksucker. He fought valiantly for the last s'more." The killer looks around and enters the main lodge. She's surprised to see nobody is around whatsoever. She says, "The least I could do is clean this place up before I set my murder traps." And then she grabs a broom. We see each of the campers parked on the sides of the road. They're taking a break and sitting in their trunks eating packs of tuna. Killer's POV. She wipes sweat off of her forehead and finishes cleaning. Then she goes to explore the rest of the camp. She finds the counselor's cabin and goes inside. There, she's surprised how 6 laptops are set up with Zoom opened up on each of them. She sees one on each one, Counselor 1, Germany, and others in different countries. She also sees the camp's week-long schedule. "They won't even last a night," she says. And no counselors are actually there, but there are still leftover supplies from when there were counselors there last, including a full uniform. Short shorts, a shirt saying Camp Cocksucker, and a whistle. She picks up the shirt and says, "I missed being a counselor." One by one, the campers park in the parking lot, the last being Coach Meatloaf's oven mobile. His door opens up and steam comes out. The vehicle has steam machines built in for weight loss. They are all welcomed by Angela Baker, her name tag saying, Counselor Jan. She does a cringe-worthy Chief Cocksucker dance. She then tells them they'll learn how to do that later. Pee-wee looks at Yolanda and says, "Hey, aren't you supposed to be offended?" Yolanda looks at him and says, "I don't care." Pee-wee then raises his hand and says, Ma'am, I'm offended by that dance, and frankly this whole display. It's cultural appropriation, and I don't want to be involved with a camp that promotes obscene stereotypes." Counselor Jan says, "Oh yeah?" Pee-wee is tied up inside of an outhouse. Counselor Jan turns to the other campers and says, if anyone else cares to be offended, there are plenty of other safe spaces like this that I can put you in for the week's duration." Everyone shakes their heads. Counselor Jan says, "Good. Get unpacked and then join me in the main lodge for your welcome party." Betty says, "Aren't there any other counselors?" Counselor Jan says, "They will be here tomorrow." or the next day most likely. Any other questions? Zeke lifts a huge powerlifting stone up and says, Where do I put this? He just sets it down as she points to the ground. They all walk away. Counselor Jan turns to Pee-wee and says, Don't worry, I'll save the worst for last. She then closes the outhouse door and puts a padlock on it. Arthur, in his cabin with another guy, gets out his pack of cookies only to discover they're all crumbs and crushed by his weights. Jerry Lynn is in her own cabin where she sets up her entire room to be one giant advertisement for other companies' products. She then starts taking videos of herself to advertise. We finally see Coach Meatloaf entering a women's cabin with his two babes. They take one look and he goes, Yeah, we're sleeping in the oven mobile. John Boy can sleep in this shithole. They cheer and leave. They find John Boy, their driver, sleeping in the oven mobile and tell him he can take their cabin. He groans. The welcome party in the main lodge begins. There are black lights everywhere, neon dishes and cups, chips, sodas, and quiches. As well, there's 80s music blasting and lifting up the mood of the entire party and the entire audience. Arthur sits in the corner stuffing his face with popcorn, watching something on his phone. Everyone is on their fucking phone. This causes Counselor Jan to stop the music and say, One last thing. I'm gonna need everybody's phones. Coach Meatloaf says, Why is that necessary? She responds, Because it's the 80s! They all reluctantly hand their phones over. She puts them in a box and leaves the main lodge, saying she'll lock them up in the counselor's cabin. We see her throw their phones in the lake. The only people there who still have their phones are Pee-wee and Johnny. John Boy, sorry. Yolanda stops the music and says, There are a couple of guidelines I'm supposed to go over before we begin our week here. Firstly, Counselor Jan was supposed to give us pronouns as proper procedure. We are also to each be given a list of restricted words, and we need to go over seating arrangements. No mixing. And no manspreading. Wait, I lost my place. That means, Zeke, you sit by yourself? Technically. However, I really don't fucking care. My job sucks. My whole life is a joke. At least I get paid, though. Coach Meatloaf says, Bravo, Yolanda. How about we do something fun? Wet t-shirt contest? Counselor Jan says, What? Coach Meatloaf takes a soda and says, We don't drink this syrupy crap anyway unless it's diet. And even that's questionable. He shakes one up and sprays it all over Betty's shirt, his babe's shirts, and even Counselor Jan's. He says he's sorry. Counselor Jan screams and says, He better be! Zeke looks at the food and drinks and says, Hey, is there any real food here? Counselor Jan says, Of course it's real. Zeke says, I don't see any greens, any grass-fed meat, any rice cakes and peanut butter, any cottage cheese, any liver pills. What is this, a concentration camp? Counselor Jan says, Sorry, it's all we have. I could go and check, though. You want to come with? Zeke says, Sure. I need to get my evening cardio in anyway. He turns on his tiny little Fitbit and walks with her outside. Stephanie and Andy drive down the road. Then it starts to snow. Andy says, Gee, we better get there soon. When do the tours start? Stephanie says, 9 p.m. Andy says, Shit, we're going to be stuck out here. Stephanie says, I wouldn't mind. We could, you know. Andy says, Oh, no. No, 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 no. You have sex, you die. or someone else around you dies. Did you not learn anything from last movie? Stephanie says, so we're never having sex again? Andy says, maybe when we're rebooted. Stephanie says, what about kissing? Andy says, no way. You're not getting me to fall for that old trick. Kissing is sex's ugly cousin. Oh, look, there's a hitchhiker. Stephanie says, you're going to follow the no-sex horror movie rule, but you're going to pick up a bleeping hitchhiker? Andy says, you're right. Wait, sorry. Dang it. Fuck the rules. He speeds up, passing the hitchhiker. The unknown hitchhiker's 6-foot-tall figure looks angry, but has just given up caring at this point. We see a sign in the counselor's cabin saying, remember? Counselor Jam rummages through the refrigerator. Zeke says, it's not too much trouble. I brought this a shit ton of tuna. I have protein I can make protein goo with, and I have a couple of... He sees the laptops. Hey, I thought this was supposed to be the 80s, and no technology allowed. Counselor Jan says, for your guys' experience, not mine. Isn't that kind of hypocritical? She says, what did you call me? He tries to apologize, but she's made up her mind. She says, I have an idea. Fish are real food, right? He says, Yeah, I love me some tilapia. She says, I can give you my rod and you can catch some fish in our lake. He says, I like that idea. Fish fry, I can't wait. Counselor Jan says, great, and hands him a tackle box and her rod. Zeke can't fish because the lake is fucking frozen, but he does notice the cell phones. Counselor Jan approaches him and says, whoa, what are those? He says, I am going to seriously rip you a new one if those are our phones. She says, I don't know, look closer. He leans forward. She pushes him in. For a moment, it looks like he's going to be in trouble. But he quickly celebrates and then grabs the phones, which aren't very wet. He climbs out and says, whoops, great for the nervous system. I get it, Jan. It was a camp activity. We should get all the guys to come out and do it. He laughs and runs off to tell them. Then she sees it begin snowing and goes, great. Let's start off with the easiest one first, I guess. Everyone praises Counselor Jam for her activity and runs outside to do it too. With him continuously... all except for one. Arthur, the fat guy with bitch tits. Counselor Jan sits with them as he continuously eats. She says, man, stop eating already. I know it's a party, but everyone else should be able to have something to eat too. He looks at her, his double chin showing. He says, I'm bulking. She says, what does that even mean? He says, it means I get bigger and you stay small. Small little girl. I be big bulky guy. Normal chicks like it when bulking season starts. She cringes and says, hey, do you like the Georgia atomic popcorn? He says, never heard of it. She says, it's a limited edition flavor. You want me to make you a bowl? He says, sure. She enters a room in the main lodge and gets a bowl of pre-made popcorn. She pours chemicals all over it, and then she salts it with rat poison. She hands the popcorn to him. He picks up a huge handful and shoves the entire thing in his mouth. He says, good, huh? She says, yeah, this is the only batch, so let me know if it's too atomic for you. Soon enough, he begins choking. His nose begins bleeding. Foam comes out of his mouth. His eyes bleed. Finally, his eyeballs pop out of their sockets. He face plants into the popcorn. She picks up his disgusting bloody face and says, see, I always make it too atomic. Then she lets go of his head. Now for the worst part. She gets a text from Jan. It says, "What you doing?" She texts, "Cleaning." Jan says, "Wanna come over and clean my pussy with your tongue?" Counselor Jan goes, "Ew," and turns her phone off, completely off. Then she tries picking up Arthur. It's extremely hard. She ties a rope to him and drags him outside slowly. She then notices they're swimming. They could see her possibly, so she panics and drags him inside, and then she takes him upstairs into a random room and shuts the door and locks it. The others come in. She says, "For future reference, stay out of this room. I need to finish cleaning it up. It's a mess." Betty says, "That's fine with me." Coach Meatloaf says, "Hey, we're missing one of our own. Where's Arthur at?" She says, "I had to send him home. He ate almost everything I brought for the party. When I asked him to stop, he said he would just go get a pizza and go home." Coach Meatloaf says, "I didn't see him leaving. What a shame. Let's get back to partying." He'll have to join us on Zoom later. Stephanie is driving now. She pulls over and says, "We're here." Andy gets up and says, "Already?" They get out and look around, not even bothering to check out Camp Cocksucker. The forest looks pretty creepy, even in the daytime. Andy says, "We still have 5 hours until the tour starts." Stephanie says, 5 hours? That's longer than the running times of the original Stepfather movies combined. Andy and her run back into the van. It continues to snow, really badly. Pee-wee sits in the outhouse, miserable. John Boy, the driver, plays the NES in his cabin. Friday the 13th, the game specifically. Counselor Jan looks out the window. It's already 3 inches snowed. "Well, everybody, I got bad news. It's snowing so much that you'll all have to sleep in here tonight. It's not safe to go outside, especially in the dark." Everyone is pretty amenable except Carl. Carl goes, "What?" And then he begins on a roid rage at Counselor Jan. Counselor Jan says, "Look, I'm sorry. It's for your own safety, okay?" Counselor Jan locks the doors and windows. Then she places them in her pants pockets, the keys. Carl goes insane. He starts tearing up the place and growling. Betty says, "What if I need to use the ladies' room?" Counselor Jan says, "We'll figure it out. We have all night. And by the way, any damage you do to camp property, you or your boss will need to pay for personally." Carl gets even angrier and stomps his way to Counselor Jan as if he's going to get her. The other people quickly intervene and block him. Then he freezes. He looks like strawberry tomato color in the face, and he's so angry. Counselor Jan says, "If we can crush you into pieces, we can have spaghetti for dinner." Everyone laughs, except for him. This just makes him even more angry. Tears begin coming out of his eyes. Everyone gets worried and scared. We see his enlarged heart. It explodes in his chest. Counselor Jan smiles and crosses her arms. Carl falls over dead. Everyone freaks out except Coach Meatloaf. Coach says, "It was gonna happen sooner or later. Spaghetti it is." He laughs at his own joke. Counselor Jan says, "Nice line." He high-fives her. Everyone quickly nods and agrees, not caring anymore. Yolanda says, "Jan, do you have any good board games?" Counselor Jan says, "Sure I do, but you gotta give me your phones first so I know you're playing fair." They all reluctantly hand her their phones. Then she gets out a game. Stephanie and Andy lay down in their sleeping bag. Stephanie says, "Andy, something good needs to happen now." Andy says, sigh, Well, he doesn't say the sigh, obviously. You know what happened last time. Your own daughter. I can't let anything like that happen to you again. We hear crying. They look over at the camera. We see the cameraman of the movie holding the camera and tearing up. Moonshot. Sleepaway Camp 2 influence. The fireplace is going. The campers and Counselor Jan are playing Monopoly. They gripe about being hungry. Counselor Jan reminds them she can't go to the counselor's cabin to get food. Then, Jerry Lynn remembers she always keeps spare protein powder sample packets hidden everywhere, taped to her legs, taped to her pockets, under her sleeves. They all make protein shakes. They chug them down, and then they all start farting up a storm like in Blazing Saddles. Counselor Jan gives her protein shake to Yolanda. Zeke says, "Boom, I won the game!" Then he smashes his Hulk hand onto the board and knocks the entire thing over, accidentally. Everyone is bummed out. Then Coach Meatloaf says, "Hey, counselor, I want to do some more camp stuff before I take my honeys to bed. Can we turn the lights off and tell scary stories?" Counselor Jan says, "That sounds fun," and then turns off the lights. Coach Meatloaf says, "Now I want to tell the story of failed protein bars batch of Mother's Day weekend, 2020. Everyone groans because they already know what he's referring to. Once upon a time, a CEO with a lot of talent and brains and a lot of meatloaf came up with a delicious protein bar called Chocolate Fudge Stank. They all contain golden tickets, every last one of them, $5 off coupons on purchases of $500 or more. Well, this dumb guy at the lab let the chocolate dry without any covering. This caused every insect in the Georgia area to lay eggs and burrow inside our bars. Then everyone and their mother who bought this bar opened it up to find a little surprise. And I'm not talking about the fudge. We recalled them, we said sorry, we learned and grew as a company, and that's the lesson I brought you guys here to learn. Even though bad things happen, we can still stick together as a team and stuff. Jerry Lynn says, "Like when Arthur left so he could get better food?" Zeke gets off the couch and starts squatting on the ground. He says, "I got a story for you. The legend of the primal man. Man used to be better, less pussy. Man used to indulge in his primal urges. Man used to not rely on technology to gain knowledge. But most of all, man used to be..." He looks around. "Ha, fuck it, I'm just kidding with you guys." He sits back on the couch normally. Counselor Jan says, "I'll go. I have one." Jerry Lynn says, "I have a better idea. Can I have my phone back? I needed to look up something really quickly." Counselor Jan says, "Sure, thanks for interrupting my scary story," and hands her phone. Jerry Lynn types on it for a while, then she looks up to confirm something. She then looks up at Counselor Jan. They look at each other in the eyes. Jerry Lynn says, "How about strip true crime trivia?" Everyone agrees. Counselor Jan says, "I'll sit this one out. Can't risk my boss finding out, you know." Jerry Lynn says, "Let's start off with an easy question. Whoever gets it right gets to pick someone else and tell them what to take off. If you get it wrong, I get to pick. The game ends when someone is fully nude. Round 1. Coach Meatloaf. What does BTK stand for? Coach Meatloaf says, "Bacon, lettuce, tomato?" Jerry Jerry Lynn says, no, the answer is supposedly bind, torture, kill. Coach Meatloaf, take off your shoes. He gladly takes them off and throws them in the fire. He throws them in the fireplace. Jerry Lynn says, Betty, what did Herb Baumeister use as an alias when picking up young victims? Betty says, awesome? Jerry Lynn says, Betty, take off your shoes. Brian Smart was the answer. Next one. Zeke, what was Angela Baker's real name? Zeke says, I should know that. I've heard about her before. Wasn't it Peter? Jerry Lynn says, yes, you get the first point. It was Peter Baker. Then our parents' taxes paid for him to have a sex change. Zeke says, I pick Yolanda, take off your shoes. Yolanda gets excited and takes them off. Counselor Jan stands up and gets a soda, watching everyone else carefully. Jerry Lynn says, oh, you'll like this one, Counselor Jan. Counselor Jan says, oh yeah, try me. Jerry Lynn says, what did Angela Baker disguise herself as when she committed the Camp Rolling Hills massacre? Counselor Jan says, Counselor. Everyone complains they thought she wasn't playing. Counselor Jan stomps off and closes the door to the kitchen type of room. It's like a room with like kitchen cooking supplies, but like not a lot of food. Like there's just some crapola in there, there's not really anything of substance for the most part. So I just wanted to clarify that. You got to get all the food in the counselor's cabin for the most part. Okay. Betty says, did we hurt her feelings? Jerry Lynn says, I'll tell you guys what. You keep on playing with yourselves and I'll go see what's up. Jerry Lynn walks into the kitchen. Surprised the door is unlocked. Jerry Lynn says, hello there. I know exactly who you are, Counselor Jan. The question is, what are you willing to pay for me not to know? She is weirded out. It doesn't seem like anyone's around. Jerry Lynn says, did you really think no one would recognize you? This shit happened in our area, for Christ's sake. She keeps walking around. That's when she comes across a giant watermelon with the hockey mask rolling down the floor. She gasps in shock. Then she turns around and Counselor Jan is right there. She has work gloves on and a stainless steel mandolin slicer. She grabs Jerry Lynn's neck and squeezes it so she doesn't scream loud and slices off her entire face with the mandolin. Pieces of her face shred off as the mandolin slices up and down and up and down. Oh, God, just imagining that. Ugh. Blood squirts everywhere. Then she lets go of her. Jerry Lynn cries and gasps, blood dripping everywhere. Her torn up face must hurt like hell. And wait. Counselor Jan picks up a meat cleaver. Creative kills can be a lot of fun. But sometimes, nothing beats a good old-fashioned. Jerry Lynn holds up her hands. Counselor Jan hacks off her head with the cleaver. It begins rolling on the floor next to the hockey-masked watermelon. Counselor Jan picks them up and says, I'm glad we figured out a compromise, Jerry Lynn. You know what they say. 2 heads are better than 1. She throws them back on the floor. Then she throws their cell phones out a window. Jerry Lynn's included. It's reached 6 inches, she sees. John Boy scratches his balls as he keeps playing NES. He's like an excited little kid playing his game system. He eats a delicious sub sandwich he brought in preparation for the first night. Pee-wee is moaning and groaning inside the outhouse. Stephanie checks her watch. Andy, it's 9 o'clock. Andy wakes up and pats the water pistol in his pocket. He says, "Do you actually think they'll still do that hunt tonight? How desperate could these people be?" We see the group of true crime fans holding walking sticks and covered from head to toe. It is very cool, ghostly shot, the way that these shadowy figures are outlined by the moonlight. They all have headlamps on too. The leading guy, dressed in neon red, looks at Stephanie and Andy coming up to them in shorts and t-shirts. He says, "Nice of you guys to join us. You're 1 minute late. Remember, there are no refunds." Stephanie says, "Do you have any extra headlamps?" One ghost hunter says, "I have 2 extra. Here." They stand there and wait for the leader to hand them each one. The leader takes them from the ghost hunter and checks them first. Andy leans over and whispers, "If Angela is trying to pass off as a man, I don't think she's doing a very good job." He nods at her, even though that statement is comically inaccurate to reality. The campers begin yawning. Counselor Jan walks in holding the watermelon now cut in half. It would explain the red stains on her shirt and shorts. She says, "How about some dessert?" Everyone is eating pieces of it. Coach Meatloaf says, "Every one of us is getting their blood work done after we get back home from this trip." Yolanda says, "Say, Jan, where is Jerry Lynn? Did she get sent home too?" Counselor Jan says, "I promised her not to tell you guys, but she wanted to do an all-nighter challenge in the kitchen. Something about a before your workout or whatever pill sponsoring her. So she helped me cut up the watermelon, and I let her do that as a compromise." Zeke says, "That's very considerate of you, Jan." Everyone else agrees. The ghost hunters are trailing through the woods as a horrific blizzard ensues. The leader says, "All right, so it's going to be super duper hard to see the remnants of camp in some spots. After years of neglect, overgrowth, vandalism, this camp has gone to hell. This, what we're standing on, is the main building. See, that plank of wood standing up there? That's what's left of the front door. The former owners of this property were more okay with paying taxes for Angela Baker to have a sex change operation in prison than fixing up this camp." Stephanie says, "Excuse me, sir, how do we find the forbidden cabin?" "You know her hideout?" The leader says, "We're not going there. I'm sorry." Andy says, "Wait, but this tour was supposed to be..." The leader interrupts, "Now look, there are plenty of ghosts to find here. One time a kid saw a woman with blonde hair flashing her boobs at him. Turns out it was one of the campers. That is one of many, many confirmed ghost sightings on these tours. So follow me and don't get lost." One ghost hunter says, "I want to speak to your manager about you. What's your name?" The leader says, "It's TC." He then walks off. Everyone stands there in bewilderment. Stephanie says, "TC? I thought he was one of her victims." They all follow him. They notice him going faster and faster despite the miserable conditions. Then he turns to the left of a tree and disappears. They all rush to see where he went. Then they look at the tree. It says, "Rest in peace, TC," carved on it from a knife. So I'm going to stop there. That's the first half of this story. It is an hour-long video right now, so I want to stop. So anyways, see you in part 2.